So hello mga ka-generals, welcome back to Math Learning. Okay, this lesson is a continuation of our lesson on the previous video, which is the graph of an inverse function. In the previous video, our example is an example of one-to-one function. At yung example na yon is walang restriction na nangyari. Okay, in this example, we have a different one. Okay, this example is not a one-to-one function. It is because the highest degree or the degree of this function is greater than 1, which is 2. And this example also has the behavior of the graph, or meron siyang graph na parabolic one or parabola. So for us to be able to come up with this function to become a one-to-one function, we need to restrict some points or some values of x in the domain for us to come up with a one-to-one function. So ano ba yung restriction na kinuha ko? Meron tayong restriction, or we restricted the domain on or at x is greater than or equal to negative 2. So we have this one. This restriction also will be our domain, and later on this restriction will be our range of an inverse of a function. Okay, let's try to find kung bakit ba hindi talaga yung one-to-one function, because this graph, okay, this function will have this graph, ano po, the parabola. So, dito siya sa my x is equals to negative 2. Ano po, because this one will tell us kung ano ba yung horizontal shift ng ating, or horizontal shifting ng ating parabola. Okay, we have this one, and then as you can see, as we use the vertical line test, we have this 2 point of intersection. So nag-cross yung horizontal line dito sa 2 side or 2 points of the solution of this f of x. So para magkaroon tayo ng one-to-one function, kailangan natin i-restrict. So dito po, from this one, pag na-observe niyo, this part will become a one-to-one function, because kapag nag-test tayo ng horizontal line test dyan, it will have a 1 point of intersection. And also this part, this other part, or this other half also is now a one-to-one function if we restrict the domain as or at x is greater than or equal to negative 2, or x is less than or equal to negative 2. But this example, we restrict the domain at x is equal or x is greater than or equal to negative 2. So ang matitirang parts ng solution will be this one. Ano po? Ayan. Yan yung matitirang part ng solution, because these are this graph will move to infinity as x is equal or as x greater than or equal to negative 2 daw na sinasabi. Ano po? Okay, the first thing that we need to do is to find the inverse of a function. In finding the inverse of a function, the first step in finding the inverse is by letting f of x be equal to y. Ano po? That is the very first step that we need to consider. We have to change f of x into y, and then also copy the quantity x plus 2 raised to 2, and we have this restriction x is greater than or equal to negative 2. Wag natin yung kakalimutan. Ano po? So next step is to interchange x and y. So we have this x is equals to y plus 2 then raised to 2. And then since we need to find the value of y in terms of x, since meron tayong power of 2 dito, we need to square both sides. We need to square both sides for us to be able to find the value of y. And then meron na tayong ganitong result. So the square root of x is equals to y plus 2. Kasi na-cancel out na natin yung na-cancel out na natin yung raised to the second power by the using of this square root principle, or square root number na to. So we have this one, and then we need to transpose this positive 2 katabi ng the square root of x. So, magiging na siyang negative 2. So, we have the square root of x minus 2 is equals to y. And then, the result of that is, we need to rewrite, pero ganito na. Ano po? So, we have the square root of x minus 2. And then, the inverse of this function will be f raised to negative 1 of x is the square root of x minus 2. So, meaning to say, this will be our inverse of a function using the original given. Ano po? Ito na yung magiging inverse natin. Okay, take note of that. Next, the domain of the inverse of a function. Inverse na yan. Ito yung kukonsider natin in finding the domain of the inverse of a function, and we need to find the value of x. Kung saan ba? Kung ano ba yung mga possible values of x. Since we're dealing with the radical here, so magpo-focus tayo inside the radical. So if we have a radical, so hindi pwede sa loob ng radical yung negative number. Ano po? Kasi magkakaroon tayo ng imaginary result or irrational number. For example, we have this f of x is equal to the square root of x plus 4. Then we're going to find the domain of this function. Ang kukunin lang po natin, we need to take this x plus 4 and then equate that into 0. So, x will be negative 4. And hindi pa po dyan yan nagtatapos. Kasi po, kailangan natin kunin yung mga possible values of x that will make x values be the set of all positive integers. Ano po? So, meaning to say, we are going to select those numbers that is greater than or equal to this negative 4, because these are the numbers that will make these x values become para maiwasan natin yung irrational number or imaginary number. So, meaning to say, our values of x inside this radical will be x is equal, or x must be greater than or equal to negative 4. And also the domain of this function, the domain of that will be equal to x such that x is all possible values of x such that x must be greater than or equal to negative 4, because as we plug in the values of x here inside this radical, hindi po tayo magkakaroon ng imaginary because we restrict the domain at x is greater than or equal to negative 4. So that is the importance of finding the domain of this function under radical numbers. So we have that one. Ano po? So
let's try to find the inverse, or let's try to find the domain of the inverse of a function.
Okay, in this example, we have the square root of x, and then the square root of x tells us that we need to omit the values of x that will make it negative. Ano po? So, kukunin natin yung mga positive numbers dito sa x. So, for us to be able to find that, we need to find the value of x and equate it to 0. So, we have the value of x is equals to 0. And we have this result. X must be greater than or equal to 0. So, meaning to say, our domain here, we need to select the positive numbers inside of this radical symbol for us to be able to avoid the irrational number or the imaginary number. Ano po? Okay, the domain of this inverse function will be, the set of all possible values of x such that x must be greater than or equal to 0. Or we can also write this into an interval form. So we have, since x must be greater than or equal to 0, so 0 must be part of the solution. So we use bracket and into positive infinity. So this will be our domain of the inverse of a function. Next, the range of the inverse of a function. In finding the range of the inverse of a function, we need to look at our original function and then the restricted domain. So our restricted domain is, we have this original function x, the quantity x plus 2 raised to positive 2 or raised to 2, and we have this restriction. This restriction, ito pong restriction na to, ito na yung magiging domain ng ating function, the domain of our f of x. So that is x such that x must be greater than or equal to negative 2, and that will be the domain of f of x. And also, in finding the inverse or finding the range of the inverse function, yung domain natin dito sa original function will be our range of the inverse of a function. And we're just going to replace y into x. Ano po? So, magiging na siyang, our range will be using our original function. So, we have the restriction. So, our range will be is equal the set of all possible values of y such that y must be greater than or equal to negative 2. That is using our original function with the restricted domain of x must be greater than or equal to negative 2. Next, also we can write the interval form. So since negative 2 will be part of our solution in the domain, therefore our interval form will be, so we have negative 2 and positive infinity. So open siya sa positive infinity and then bracket siya sa negative 2 because that is part of our solution. So that is. Now, using the table of values. Okay, in the table of values, we have to use the restricted domain of our f of x. F of x stands for our original function. So our original function tell us we need to restrict the domain at x must be greater than or equal to negative 2. So therefore, we have these values of x that is greater than or equal to negative 2. So we have this value. So
magsisimula daw tayo sa negative 2, pataas, ano po. So we choose negative 2, negative 1, 0, also positive 1, and then positive 2. Pwede din kayo magdagdag, pero yan yung mas magandang i-trace, ano po. Because since the function is parabolic 1, so mas matataas na yung numbers dito sa y-axis, ano po. O sa y value, not y-axis, so y value or the range.
So x stands for our domain and y stands for our range. So in finding the value of y here, we use our original function. Our original function is f of x is equals to quantity x plus raised to 2 with the restricted domain of x must be greater than or equal to negative 2. And let's start with negative 2 pataas. Ano po? Greater than this number. So we start with negative 2. F of negative 2
is equal to negative 2 plus 2 raised to 2. So that is with negative 2 plus 2 will have 0. Raised to 2 is also 0. So we have this 0. Next we have negative 1. F of negative 1. So we have f of negative 1. So we have negative 1. Negative 1 plus, negative 1 plus 2 raised to 2 is negative 1 plus 2 is positive 1 raised to 2. That is 1. This is 1. Also f of 0. We have 0 plus 2 raised to 2 is positive 4. And also we have f of 1, that is 1 plus 2 raised to 2, that is 1 plus 2 is 3 raised to 2, that is 9. And also we have f of positive 2, 2 plus 2 raised to 2, that is 2 plus 2, so 2 is 16. So we have 16. So therefore, we have this set of ordered pairs in the original function f of x.
Ano po? Next, we have to use this example. We have to use naman yung our inverse of a function. Our inverse of a function is, we have f of x is equal to the square root of x, minus 2. So since ang ating range or ang ating domain sa inverse of a function is x such that x must be greater than or equal to 0, and na-restrict natin siya at x must be greater than or equal to 0 daw. So meaning to say, we start at 0 and also 1. Kuha tayo ng mga points. So ito na yung kukunin natin. And we have 16. And observe po kung anong mangyayari. Ano po, observe nyo kung anong mangyayari dito sa f of x result at dito sa inverse function result. So we have to substitute all of these numbers. So we have f of 0. So we have
The square root of 0 minus 2. The square root of 0 is 0 minus 2, that is negative 2. Negative 2. F of 1 of 1. The square root of 1 minus 2. The square root of 1 is 1. And minus 2. 1 minus 2, that is negative 1. 1. Next, we have f. Kung meron na ba kayong papansin, we just go later on, we're going to compare the result. So we have the square root of 4 minus 2, that is the square root of 4 is 2, minus 2, that is 0. And also we have f of 9. Square root of 9 minus 2, that the square root of 9 is 3 minus 2, that is 1. And also we have f of 16. We have f of 16. Square root of 16 minus 2. The square root of 16 is 4 minus 2, that is 2. So it is positive 2. So this
are the result for our inverse of a function at mga ordered pairs dito sa inverse of a function, at ito naman yung ordered pairs dito sa f of x. Ano po? So kailangan na natin siyang i-graph using this table of values. Kailangan natin siyang i-graph. Pero bago tayo mag-graph, kailangan muna natin gumawa ng line of symmetry showing that y is equals to x. Ano po? At yung line of symmetry na yon is yun yung paraan para makita natin yung reflection ng dalawang function na to, f of x and then the inverse of that f of x. So let's try finding or let's try plotting those ordered pairs. So let's start with f of x. So I already put the line of symmetry here. So this is our line of symmetry. Symmetry y is equals to x. So we need to start plotting f of x. So we have f of x. So at f of x, we have the ordered pair of 0 and 2. So we start here 0 and 2. Okay, not 0 and 2. We have negative 2 and 0 rather. Next, we have negative 1 and positive 1. So right here. So nandito siya. Next, we have 0 and positive 4. So nandito siya. Next, we have positive 1 and positive 9. We have positive 1 and positive 9 right here. Next, we have positive 2 and positive 16. So nandito po siya. So kung napapansin nyo, yung restriction natin at x is equal to x is greater than or equal to negative 2, at na po yun po. Pataas po yan as x value is approaches infinity, positive infinity, also y value approaches the positive infinity. So eto na po yung magiging graph, and also dito is inverse of a function. We have inverse of a function, we start with 0 and negative 2. So we have 0 and then negative 2. Dito siya. Then we have negative 1 and positive 1. So we have positive 1 and negative 1. So we have positive 1 and negative 1 right here. Next, we have 4 and 0. So we have 4 and 0. And then also we have 9 and 1. 9 and 1. So nandito siya. And also we have 16 and positive 2. So as you can see, the distance between or the distance along with this line of symmetry is equal. Ano po? So equal sila. Ano po? So kailangan na natin siyang i-graph. Ano po? I-graph na natin siya. Okay, graph na natin. Ano po? So, from this point, papunta po siya dito to infinity. So, from this point, papunta po dyan. So, napapansin nyo, yan po yung magiging behavior ng graph natin. Ano po? Ito yung 2 and 16, at ito rin naman, yung inverse of this 2 and 16, we have 16 and 2. Ganun lang. Ano po? Napansin nyo, ito yung original function, f of x, flinip natin along with this y is equals to x, dito po siya papasok. Ito po yung magiging inverse natin of negative 1 of x. So that is graphing the inverse of a function. Ano po? So, I hope you clearly understand this lesson. Ano po? So, kung napapansin nyo, pwede na nating observe yung restriction. So, our inverse function, we have also the restriction from each domain and range. So, yung domain natin, we have the restriction at must be, we have the restriction dito sa inverse natin. We have the restriction of the domain of x must be greater than or equal to 0. At tingnan natin. Napansin natin, yung domain natin is must be x is greater than or equal to 0. At tama naman tayo. Ano po? Tama naman. And we have also, sa original function natin is x must be greater than or equal to negative 2. Ito po yun. Ito po yun. We start this one. Ito yung restriction. So that is x must be greater than or negative 2. Ano po? So that is graphing the inverse of a function. Thank you very much.